Why did his hands shake when he handed her the rifle? Staff Sergeant Maria Santos caught the tremor immediately. Corporal Jake Mitchell wasn't the type to lose his nerve easily. He had steady hands, the kind that belonged on a sniper's trigger. But that morning, inside the harsh brightness of forward operating base Cobra, the young soldier's knuckles whitened as he offered her the M82, its battered frame catching the desert sun. Maria didn't take it right away. She studied him first. 22 years old, fresh out of sniper school, Jake had been under her wing for weeks. She had taught him how to breathe through doubt, how to slow his pulse when fear pressed against his. But today, he looked like a man carrying a secret. "What's wrong with it?" she asked finally, nodding at the rifle. "It jammed," Jake said, voice low, almost ashamed. "Yesterday, near the village, I tried clearing it. Nothing worked, and we're supposed to head out in 2 hours." Maria exhaled, stretching the fatigue from her shoulders. 8 months deployed. 8 months of waking to the sound of helicopters, of dust finding its way into her food, her clothes, her lungs. She was tired, yes, but routine kept her steady. Every morning she cleaned her own rifle like it was part of her body. Every evening she replayed the day's shots in her head, those she took and those she chose not to. She finally accepted Jake's weapon, turning it in her hands. The weight was familiar. The scars on the stock told a story of long, violent use. And then she saw it. A glint of sunlight, an engraving. At first she thought her eyes had tricked her, but no. There it was, etched deep into the metal just below the serial number. 305 confirmed. 3 numbers that didn't belong to Jake Mitchell or any rookie sniper. Numbers like that belonged to ghosts. Her pulse quickened. She tilted the weapon slightly and saw more, the initials RK. Maria's breath caught. Her thumb traced the cold letters as a tremor ran through her hand. Whoever RK was, this rifle had been theirs, and they had carried it with a deadly, almost impossible mastery. 305 kills. She had heard whispers of numbers that high, legends passed between soldiers when the desert night grew too long. But here it was, carved into steel, undeniable. "Mitchell," she said carefully, her voice quieter now, "where did you get this rifle?" Jake shifted uncomfortably. His eyes fell to the ground. "It was issued to me when I arrived. Supply said it belonged to a sniper who didn't make it. They needed to put it back in rotation." The desert heat pressed down harder. Maria's throat tightened. Holding this rifle suddenly felt heavier than steel should weigh. Every notch in its surface carried the burden of choices she understood all too well, choices between one enemy's life and the safety of dozens of her own. "Do you know who RK was?" Jake shook his head. "Only that she was a sniper, a woman, that's all I heard." A woman! That word burned in Maria's mind. Female snipers were rare, fewer than 1 in 100. And of those, almost none ever reached such impossible numbers. Whoever RK was, she had walked through fire, carved a legacy into the battlefield, and disappeared without even a name whispered across the base. Maria turned the weapon in her hands, jaw tight. Then she got to work. The jam wasn't complicated, just cruel. Fine sand had worked its way into the bolt, ground deep into the mechanism. She extracted it carefully, every movement deliberate. Jake stood by, silent, watching his mentor breathe life back into a weapon that carried the blood of another. "Keep it clean," she muttered as she cycled the action and heard the satisfying click of freedom. "Always check for sand, especially after contact." Jake nodded, taking the rifle back, but Maria's mind was elsewhere. "RK. 305 confirmed." That engraving wasn't just a record. It was a confession, a warning, a legacy. And Maria felt something stir in her chest, a pull as if she'd been chosen to know, to remember. The morning briefing dragged. Captain's voice droned through the plan for patrol. The map stretched across the board, routes marked, risks outlined. But Maria couldn't hear him. All she heard was the quiet whisper of a name not yet spoken, and the echo of numbers she couldn't let go. When the meeting ended, she didn't join the others right away. She slipped out, boots crunching against the gravel, making her way toward the supply depot. Sergeant First Class Tommy Burke, the man who managed half the base's lifeline, sat buried in paperwork when she entered. "Burke," she said, "I need to know about a rifle. Serial number 7,390,4821. Burke looked up, brow furrowing. "That's rifle." Maria froze. "RK." Her heart skipped, the pieces fitting too perfectly. Burke confirmed, pulling out a thick folder from a battered cabinet. His voice softened, the way a soldier's voice always did when speaking of the fallen. "Best sniper I've ever seen. 23 years I've been in uniform, and no one came close to her." Maria leaned forward, eyes locked on the black-and-white photo Burke slid across the table. A young Latina woman stared back. Combat gear, dark eyes steady, hard lines around them, the kind you only earned after seeing too much war too young. She couldn't have been older than 28. "She enlisted at 19, Burke said. Started infantry, her scores off the charts. She didn't just shoot. She read the battlefield like it was a book written only for her." Maria studied the photo, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. 3 deployments, 18 months of combat, Burke continued, flipping pages. That's how she reached 305, and every one of those kills, not about glory. She studied patterns, watched movements, placed herself exactly where she could save the most lives. Half the reports I've got in here credit her with stopping ambushes before they started. He tapped a map peppered with red dots. "Each of these is one of hers. Look at the pattern near patrol routes, supply lines. She didn't just shoot, she shielded." Maria's chest tightened. It wasn't just the number, it was the philosophy, the clarity. But then Burke's voice dropped. "She carried the weight of it, every single shot." Maria knew that weight, the invisible ledger, the faces you never saw but never stopped feeling. "What happened to her?" she asked, though dread coiled inside her. Burke's jaw hardened. "Final mission 3 months ago, Overwatch on a joint op. Intel was bad. Taliban surrounded her position, 40 fighters. She held them off for over 2 hours, long enough for the team she was covering to make it out. They found her still at her post, rifle loaded, ready to fire." The room seemed to blur. Maria stared at the photo, at the woman whose initials had been carved into steel, whose silence had already reached across months to pull Maria closer. "And the engraving," Maria whispered. Burke smiled faintly. "She earned the Silver Star after that mission, posthumous. I had it engraved on her rifle, felt right. A soldier like her deserved to be remembered." Silence stretched between them. Maria nodded, her throat thick. She wanted to ask more, about letters, journals, anything that would make more than numbers on a page, but the weight in her chest was too much. She excused herself, the desert air hitting her like a wave as she stepped back outside. That night she couldn't sleep. The base murmured with distant generators and the low hum of radios, but Maria lay awake staring at the ceiling of her bunk. A woman who had carried the same rifle, the same duty, the same impossible choices. Maria didn't know why yet, but she felt chosen. As if the weapon hadn't just been handed to Mitchell, it had been handed to her through him. A burden passed silently, waiting for someone who would listen. And Maria was listening. She didn't know it yet, but story was about to unravel before her in fragments, through records, through letters, through the memories of those who had known her. Each fragment would pull Maria deeper into a legacy of sacrifice, courage, and the quiet agony of being both protector and executioner. But tonight, alone in the suffocating Afghan heat, Maria stared into the dark and felt the first stirring of something she hadn't felt in months. A question: who was really? And what would Maria do when that answer demanded more than she thought she could give? Why did the chaplain already have her name on his lips when she knocked? 3 days after learning about from Burke, Maria found herself standing outside Chaplain Major David Foster's office. The small building sat at the edge of the base, its walls lined with sandbags that did little to mute the chaos outside, generators humming, boots crunching gravel, distant gunfire echoing from the hills. Yet inside, there was a stillness, almost sacred. She hesitated before stepping in. Her hand lingered on the wooden doorframe as if crossing into that room would bind her to something she wasn't ready for. But she had to know more. She had to. When she finally entered, Chaplain Foster looked up from a stack of boxes and smiled gently. "Sergeant Santos," he said, "I was expecting you." The word stopped her in place, expecting her. "How?" "Tommy Burke told me," the chaplain interrupted softly. "You were asking about Staff Sergeant." Maria sat down, stiff in her chair. She tried to look composed, but her throat burned. I don't know why, sir, but I feel like I need to understand her. That rifle, it's not just a weapon. It feels like a voice," the chaplain offered, "a burden passed down." Maria swallowed hard and nodded. He pulled out a small wooden box from the filing cabinet behind him. Its edges were worn, the latch bent slightly. "Asked me to hold these during her deployment. She told me if anything happened, I should decide what to do with them. Maybe she knew someone like you would come looking." He placed the box on the desk between them. Maria hesitated, her fingers trembling before she finally opened it. Inside were fragments of a life, letters, photographs, a leather-bound journal no bigger than her palm. The kind of items soldiers carried when they needed reminders of home. "Start with this," Foster said, handing her the top letter. "It's from her brother, arrived a week before her final mission." Maria unfolded it carefully, her chest tightening as she read the handwriting. "Dear Mom, worries every time the news mentions Afghanistan. I tell her you're the toughest person I know. The neighborhood talks about you like you're a superhero. Remember when you used to shoot Kens off the fence with Dad's old rifle? You said someday you'd be the best shot in the world. I guess you were right." Maria's lips pressed together. She could almost hear a boy's voice in those lines, filled with both pride and fear. "But we're proud of you, not for the number of bad guys you've stopped. We're proud because you're protecting people. That's who you've always been." The paper blurred as Maria's vision filled with tears she refused to let fall. She set the letter down carefully, as if it might break. "She carried these words into battle," Foster said quietly. "Every time she questioned herself, she returned to the people she fought for." Maria reached for the journal next. The leather felt worn smooth from use. A ribbon marked a page. She opened to it, her breath catching as she saw his handwriting. "Every time I look through my scope, I think about Carlos walking to school. I think about Maria next door, afraid of her husband's fists. I think about the people back home who can't defend themselves. Each shot I take here means fewer threats that might someday reach American soil. It's not about numbers. It's about being a shield." Maria's hands trembled. The words felt eerily close to her own unspoken thoughts, the things she never dared admit aloud. She understood the moral weight of what she was doing, Foster said, watching Maria carefully. And she never ignored it. That's why her legacy matters. Maria turned another page. This entry was different. "Today I got a photo from Private Johnson's wife. Their baby girl, Emma Rose. Johnson was in my sector 3 weeks ago when insurgents tried to set an ambush. I eliminated the threat before they could act. Now that little girl will grow up with her father. That makes everything worthwhile." Maria traced the photo tucked between the pages. A woman smiling, cradling an infant. A handwritten note, "Thank you for bringing my husband home." "She saved 17 families like that," Foster whispered. 17. And she kept their photos, their letters, to remind herself why the weight was worth carrying. Maria pressed the journal to her chest, silent, her own breathing uneven. She understood, she understood. But then Foster's tone shifted. He pulled out another letter, this one in handwriting, never sent. Dear Mom, I know you worry. I wish I could tell you this job doesn't affect me, but I'd be lying. Every person I stop is someone's son, someone's father. I don't take that lightly. But then I think of Sergeant Williams, who made it home to his daughters, Lieutenant, who survived the ambush because I cleared the rooftops first. The weight of taking lives is heavy, but the weight of failing to protect would be unbearable. Maria wiped her face quickly. She didn't want Foster to see the tears, but he noticed anyway. She struggled, he said softly. She questioned herself more than anyone knew. But you see, Maria, the questioning wasn't weakness. It was proof she carried humanity into every mission. The chaplain reached into the box again and brought out something small, a silver cross on a chain. He held it gently. She asked me to bless this before her last mission, said she had a feeling it might be different. She wanted people to know she fought not for glory but to protect others. Maria cupped the cross in her hand. Its metal was warm from the chaplain's touch, but it carried a weight that was more than physical. There's one last thing, Foster said, handing her a sealed envelope. She wrote this for whoever inherited her rifle. She told me to wait until the right person came along. Maria's pulse hammered. The envelope felt alive in her hands. Read it when you're ready, Foster said quietly. She knew what people needed to hear. That night, Maria sat alone on her bunk, the envelope resting on her lap. She stared at it for hours before finally breaking the seal. Inside was a single page, written in careful script. To the warrior who carries my rifle. You have inherited more than steel. You have inherited a responsibility. The number 305 represents lives taken, yes, but more importantly, it represents countless lives saved. Use this rifle with honor. Every shot you take echoes beyond the moment. Stay strong. Stay faithful. Come home safe. Your sister in arms. Maria lowered the letter slowly. The tent around her felt impossibly quiet, as if the whole base had gone silent to let those words echo. She folded the paper with reverence and tucked it into her own box of effects. The cross lay against her palm, its edges pressing into her skin. For the first time in months, she whispered a prayer, half for herself, half for. She didn't realize it yet, but had already become more than a ghost. She was a compass, a presence guiding Maria toward choices she wasn't yet ready to face. And somewhere beyond the wire, in the ridges and valleys where ambushes waited like coiled snakes, that rifle was about to demand those choices again. Why did the satellite images feel like a summons? 2 weeks after reading's letter, Maria found herself staring at grainy black and white photos on the intelligence table. A ridge, sparse vegetation, jagged rocks rising from the earth like broken teeth. To most soldiers, it was just another piece of high ground in Helmand Province. To Maria, it was sacred ground. The reports said Taliban fighters had been spotted near the same ridge where made her final stand. A coincidence, maybe, or a reminder. Captain approved her request to ride along with a patrol that would pass near the site. He didn't ask why she wanted to go. Maybe he didn't care. Or maybe he saw the stubborn fire in her eyes and knew no order would pull her away. Just another hill, muttered when she studied the maps longer than necessary. Don't get sentimental, Santos. Rocks don't remember. But Maria thought differently. She believed the ground remembered everything. The convoy left before dawn, 2 MRAPs carrying 12 soldiers. Dust kicked up behind them as they rolled across the barren expanse. Maria rode in the lead vehicle beside Corporal Jake Mitchell, who kept his rifle secured in its case at his feet. Sergeant, he said over the headset, breaking the long silence, what was she like, as a person? Maria hesitated. She had only fragments, letters, journal entries, the chaplain's quiet stories. But somehow those fragments felt enough to sketch the outline of a soul. She was like us, Maria answered, but steadier. She knew protecting others was worth more than her own comfort, maybe even her own life. She didn't look for glory. She looked for places where she could make a difference. Jake nodded slowly. He touched the case at his feet, almost unconsciously, as if seeking connection. The ridge appeared by midday, rising from the desert floor with a quiet authority. From a distance, it looked unremarkable. Up close, it was commanding, 300 meters of stone and scrub dominating the valley below. Maria climbed it on foot, each step pulling her closer to a place she had only imagined. Her boots crunched against brass shell casings half buried in the dirt, dozens of them. Silent testimony to the hours had fought alone. At the crest, Maria crouched. The view stole her breath. Sight lines stretched across the valley floor, perfect angles for covering the village below. She could see why had chosen this spot. Tactical genius. But it was also a trap, isolated, surrounded by terrain that funneled enemies like water into predictable paths. She prepared for a long fight, Staff Sergeant David observed, examining the stone barriers. These aren't hasty. She built them for hours of defense. Maria touched the rough edges, imagining's hand stacking the rocks, steady even as danger closed in. She held them here, Maria murmured, 40 fighters for over 2 hours. The ground whispered, brass casings, spent magazines, marks etched by rifle bipods. Every detail spoke of final stand, calculated, disciplined, unyielding. Jake set up's rifle on the same rock rest where it had last been positioned. He looked at Maria. "Permission to fire, Sergeant." She nodded. The shot thundered, echoing across the valley. The rifle still sang with deadly precision, the sound folding back against the mountains like a memory refusing to fade. "Check this out," Corporal Lisa called from 20 meters away. She had found another fighting position hidden behind scrub, spare ammunition, water bottles, a med kit still sealed. Maria's chest tightened. Had built redundancies, escape routes, backup positions. She had planned for everything except being outnumbered 40-1. Among the supplies, Maria's hand brushed something unexpected. A small notebook wrapped in waterproof plastic. She unwrapped it carefully, heart pounding. It was. The first entry was dated days before her death. Day 3 of Overwatch. Enemy movement unusual. More weapons moving through the village than normal. Increased chatter. Feels like they're preparing something big. Maria turned the page. Day 5. Confirmed leak. They know about the raid. Considered aborting, but too many American lives at stake. Staying in position. Will adapt as needed. Her throat tightened as she flipped to the last page. They're coming. 4 dozen fighters closing in. I can hold them long enough for extraction. This will be my last position. Tell my family I chose to stand and fight because that's what warriors do. Staff Sergeant, out. Maria closed the notebook slowly, reverently, as if it were scripture. Hadn't been ambushed blindly. She had known. She had stayed anyway. She had made a conscious choice to die so others could live. Before Maria could speak, Jake's urgent voice cut across the ridge. Movement in the village. Maria snapped her binoculars up. Below, figures shifted between buildings, moving too deliberately to be civilians. Their steps cautious, their bodies low, as if trying not to be seen. Could be nothing, said, though doubt tinged his voice. No, Maria muttered. She studied their movements, the angles, the spacing. They mirrored the tactics had described in her notebook. They're setting up an ambush. Same pattern, same trap. The radio crackled suddenly. Captain's voice cut in, harsh against the tension. All call signs be advised. We've lost contact with a patrol. 2 vehicles, 12 soldiers. Last seen heading toward your location 6 hours ago. Ice flooded Maria's veins. Another unit, walking into the same snare. Sir, she transmitted, forcing calm into her voice. We're in Overwatch. Perfect position to cover their approach. We can stop this before it happens. Negative, Santos replied. Orders are recon only. Extract to rally point Alpha immediately. The words hung heavy, final. Maria lowered the radio slowly, her mind racing. She looked at Jake, at's rifle, at the valley below where American lives balanced on the edge of a knife. His words echoed in her memory. Every shot I take here means fewer threats reaching home. Mitchell, she said, her voice steady now, set up that rifle, long range. We're not leaving them to die. Jake's eyes widened. Sergeant, the captain said. I know what he said. Her jaw clenched. Disobeyed orders to save lives. Sometimes duty isn't about obedience. It's about doing what's right. Jake hesitated only a second before nodding. He locked the bipod into place, chambered around, and sighted the valley. Maria lay beside him, glassing the village through her scope. The trap was set. Fighters slipping into doorways, others positioning on rooftops, just waiting for the missing patrol to roll through. Then movement at the edge of the valley. American Humvees, battered and dust-covered, limping forward unaware of the noose tightening around them. Maria exhaled slowly, the weight of his notebook still heavy in her chest pocket. This is it, she whispered. Guide me. The first shot cracked like thunder, and the valley erupted in chaos. How long could they hold against the tide? The first crack of his rifle split the silence of the valley, and in that moment the trap was broken. A fighter crumpled near a rooftop, his rifle clattering against clay tiles. For a heartbeat, the valley froze, Taliban eyes snapping upward toward the ridge, realizing they'd been seen. Then chaos. Gunfire erupted in violent bursts, echoing through the village. Figures scattered into cover, others blindly firing up at the ridge. Dust clouds rose as bullets chewed through walls. The Americans in the convoy slammed their vehicles into reverse, caught between confusion and ambush. Maria lay flat against the stone, her heartbeat strangely calm, as if the rifle itself had stilled her blood. Through her scope, she found the next target, a man raising an RPG, steadying himself on the edge of a window. Exhale. Trigger squeeze. He fell backward, the launcher tumbling from his grasp before it fired. Two down, Maria said, her voice clipped steady. Jake worked beside her, his breaths uneven but his aim true. He took his shot, clean, precise, and another rooftop fighter collapsed. They're adjusting, shouted from his position, ducking as rounds kicked up dirt dangerously close. Maria shifted her scope. Yes, they were adapting, moving faster, using alleyways to mask their approach. She saw 3 fighters sprinting toward a narrow street that led directly to the Americans' vehicles. They'll cut the convoy off if they reach that corner, she warned. Jake swiveled. His shot cracked, missed, ricochet sparking off stone, his breath caught. Maria didn't hesitate. She shifted, squeezed, and the lead fighter dropped, rolling hard into the dirt. The other 2 faltered, scrambling back. Jake cursed under his breath. I had it. You'll get the next one, Maria said firmly, her eyes never leaving her scope. Stay with me. Rounds continued to hiss past, striking the ridge in sprays of dirt and shattered stone. Maria felt fragments sting her cheek. The enemy was pouring heavy fire now, trying to blind the Overwatch long enough to finish the convoy below. Captain is demanding a sitrep, yelled over the comms. What do you want me to tell him? Maria clenched her jaw. They were already too deep to turn back. Tell him nothing he doesn't already know. We're engaged. Our people are alive because of it. A pause on the net, then silence didn't push. Maria adjusted, eyes narrowing through the scope. She could see the Americans now, half out of their vehicles, scrambling for cover behind the hulking MRAPs. Confusion rippled through their ranks. They didn't know where the shots were coming from, only that someone up high was cutting down the men trying to kill them. Good, let them focus on surviving. Let her and Jake carry the weight. Movement, Jake hissed. His rifle cracked and a figure at the edge of the village dropped. His hands shook afterward, but his eyes burned with something Maria recognized, resolve forged in fire. They worked like that for minutes that felt like hours. Targets rising, shots echoing, dirt exploding around them in angry retaliation. The ridge became alive with noise, the world narrowing to scopes and breath and the rhythm of trigger pulls. But Maria knew the math. They were 2 rifles against dozens. They could slow the ambush, scatter it, but they couldn't erase the numbers. Not alone. "We need to break their focus," she muttered. "They'll overrun the Americans otherwise." "How?" Jake asked, chambering another round. Maria scanned the rooftops, the alleys, the choke points. And then she saw it, a group of fighters dragging a heavy weapon into place, mortar tubes being assembled behind a crumbled wall. "There," her tone sharpened. "If they get that mortar working, it's over." She steadied her breath, adjusted for distance, wind, angle. The rifle felt alive beneath her, its weight pressing into her shoulder like an anchor. For an instant she thought of, "Guide my shot." She squeezed. The first man fell instantly. The second scrambled, reaching for the tube. Jake's shot dropped him clean. The third fled, disappearing into the alley with the weapon half assembled. The convoy below seized the opening. The Americans regrouped, moving with renewed clarity, returning fire toward the village with mounted guns. The valley thundered with explosions, tracers cutting through the haze. But Maria knew this was only the beginning. "They're circling," she realized, watching figures peel away from the village. Fighters moving up the slope, using boulders and scrub for cover. The Taliban were coming for the ridge. "Close contact incoming," she called. "Mitchell, keep eyes on the valley. I'll cover the climb." "Sergeant." "That's in order." She slid from her position, rifle slung, drawing her sidearm. The world shifted from distant precision to brutal immediacy, shadows darting between rocks, muzzle flashes sparking at closer and closer ranges. Her pistol barked, 2 figures dropping. Dirt kicked near her boots as rounds slammed into the ridge. She pressed against the stone, breath ragged, eyes searching for the next threat. One fighter appeared suddenly at the crest, AK raised. Maria fired first, the shot jerking him backward. "Sergeant," Jake's voice tore across the ridge. "Convoy's moving, they're pulling back under our cover." "Keep them alive," Maria shouted, ducking as more rounds chewed the rock near her head. She rolled, lined up, and put another down with a controlled double tap. The firefight blurred into noise and instinct. Time stretched, fractured. Every decision felt like it might be her last. And then silence. She realized it only when her ears rang, the gunfire fatting. Smoke drifted upward, stinging her eyes. Below, the convoy had broken free, vehicles rolling hard toward safer ground. They had made it. Maria collapsed against the rock, chest heaving. Her pistol smoked faintly in her grip. Jake approached, his face pale but his eyes blazing. We did it." Maria looked at him, then its rifle resting silent on the stone between them. For a moment she couldn't speak. Then finally her voice came low, heavy with both pride and sorrow. "No, she did it." Jake frowned. "Sergeant." Maria picked up the rifle gently, cradling it as if it were fragile. "She's the reason we stayed, the reason we fought. We just carried her choice forward." Jogged over, his gear battered, his helmet cracked. "Convoy reports minimal casualties. They're alive because of you too." Maria shook her head. "They're alive because of her." But even as she said it, she knew what came next would not be simple. They had disobeyed a direct order. The chain of command would demand answers. And yet in her heart, Maria felt only clarity. Sometimes the right choice wasn't the lawful one. Sometimes orders bent beneath the weight of lives. She slung the rifle over her shoulder, the metal cross once carried pressing against her chest beneath her vest. And in the quiet aftermath, she whispered the words that had guided to her final stand. "We stand because that's what warriors do." Why did silence feel heavier than gunfire? 3 months after the ridge fight, Maria Santos stood in the base chapel, silver star medal resting in her hands. Afternoon light filtered through narrow windows, casting long beams across the rows of wooden benches. Soldiers filled every seat, their uniforms pressed but their faces heavy. Many had never met, yet all of them had lived because of women like her. Chaplain Foster's voice carried low and steady, words honoring sacrifice, courage, and devotion. But Maria heard only fragments. Her focus stayed on the medal, its ribbon pristine despite the desert dust it had carried. His name was etched into the record now, but Maria knew the true story stretched beyond medals or reports. Captain stood at the pulpit, reading official remarks. Staff Sergeant, the finest traditions of the United States Army. Her courage and dedication saved countless lives. Her sacrifice will never be forgotten. Maria's jaw tightened. Formal words, clean words. But they could never touch the grit, the doubt, the lonely weight had carried on that ridge. When the service ended, soldiers filed out slowly, their boots echoing against the floor. Families approached Maria, some clutching photographs, others with tears streaming silently. Private Johnson's wife was among them, the same woman whose photo Maria had found tucked in his journal. She carried her daughter, Emma Rose, now toddling on unsteady legs. "My husband told me," she whispered, voice breaking, "that a female sniper saved his life, but I never knew her name until now. Our daughter will grow up knowing she exists because of." Maria's throat closed. She crouched slightly, looking at the little girl who clung to her mother's shoulder. Emma reached for the medal in Maria's hand, fingers brushing the silver. For a moment, Maria saw the weight of a legacy passed from soldier to child, from sacrifice to future. She forced herself to breathe. Other families came too, 17 in all. Faces Maria had never met, yet each tethered to through survival. Stories unfolded, an ambush stopped, a patrol saved, a convoy shielded. Each family carried a piece of unseen victories. It struck Maria with sharp clarity. His true legacy wasn't the number 305. It was these families. It was life, not death, that defined her. Later at the reception, Sergeant First Class Burke found Maria near the back, away from the crowd. He handed her a folder, official paperwork. "Captain filed this," Burke said quietly. Maria opened it. Her stomach tightened. A recommendation for the Bronze Star Medal. Her name. Her actions during the Ridge fight detailed in stark military language, disobeyed orders, engaged enemy overwatch, saved 12 American lives. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I went against his command. That should be a court-martial, not a medal." Burke smirked faintly. "Sometimes disobedience is the form of leadership. The men you saved, they haven't stopped talking, couldn't ignore it. He had no choice but to recommend you." Maria stared at the paper. The irony cut deep. Recognition for breaking orders, for walking the same line had walked, choosing lives over regulations. Before she could respond, Jake Mitchell appeared, carrying a long presentation case. He opened it with reverence. Inside lay his rifle, polished, cleaned, its engraving gleaming. "Sergeant," Jake said softly, "this belongs to you now." Maria frowned. "No, Mitchell, you were assigned that weapon, it's yours." Jake shook his head firmly. "With respect, no, it's hers, and now it's yours. You carried her choice forward, you earned it." His hands trembled slightly as he presented it, and Maria realized how much he, too, had changed. Story had shaped him, just as it had reshaped her. Maria accepted the case slowly, her throat tight. "There's more," Jake added, pulling out a small metal disc from his pocket. "I had this made at the machine shop." It was a duplicate of Silver Star, but instead of 305, it bore a new engraving, 317 confirmed. MS. Her initials. Maria's breath caught. "Mitchell." "You added 12 that day," he said firmly. 12 lives shielded. The rifle should carry both stories now, hers and yours." Tears burned her eyes as she traced the engraving. It wasn't pride that swelled inside her. It was weight, responsibility, continuation. Chaplain Foster joined them then, carrying his box of effects. "Maria," he said softly, "there's one last thing wanted someone like you to have." From the box he lifted silver cross, the same one Maria had held in his office months before. Attached to it was a note in handwriting, "For the warrior who carries my legacy forward. May this cross protect you as it protected me. May you find peace in serving others." Maria fastened the cross around her neck. It pressed against her chest, cool, steady, grounding. That night, alone in her quarters, Maria set the rifle across her lap. The dual engravings 305 RK and 317 MS caught the faint light. She touched the cross, then let her still folded in her box. She whispered aloud, as if might hear. "You didn't die for a number. You died for people, and now it's my turn." For the first time since she'd arrived in Afghanistan, Maria felt something that had eluded her for months. Not pride, not triumph. Purpose. Why did the recruits stare at the rifle like it was holy? 6 months after the Ridge, Maria Santos stood in a classroom at Fort Benning. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching the steel of M82 displayed at the front. Its stock bore 2 sets of engravings now, 305 RK and 317 MS. The rifle sat elevated, framed like a relic, its presence commanding silence. Maria looked at the young women sitting before her. A dozen recruits, their hair pulled back, uniforms stiff, eyes wide with anticipation. They weren't just soldiers. They were volunteers for one of the Army's rarest, most demanding roles, sniper school. Maria could feel their awe pressing toward her like heat. It wasn't just her they looked at. It was the rifle. "This weapon has served 2 masters," Maria began, her voice carrying steady across the room. "2 women who understood the same truth. Being a sniper isn't about numbers. It's not about glory. It's about being the guardian who stands watch while others sleep." The room stayed silent. Some of the recruits leaned forward unconsciously, as if trying to absorb every word. Maria let the pause stretch. Then she gestured to the weapon. "You'll hear stories about kills, about confirmed counts. Ignore them. The real measure of a sniper isn't how many you take, it's how many you save." One recruit, a young woman from Rico named, raised her hand hesitantly. "Sergeant Santos, what happened to Staff Sergeant? Why did her service end?" Maria inhaled slowly. She had been asked that before, and each time it tore something open inside her. "She died," Maria said simply. Her eyes dropped briefly to the rifle, then rose again. "On a ridge in Afghanistan, 40 fighters closed in on her position. She held them off long enough for her unit to escape. She knew she wouldn't survive. She chose to stay anyway." A hush swept across the room. Some recruits shifted uncomfortably, others straightened as if bracing themselves against the weight of the story. Another recruit raised her voice, quiet but trembling. "Do you think we'll face the same choice someday?" Maria's gaze lingered on her, then swept across all their faces. "Probably. Every sniper eventually does. A moment will come when orders conflict with conscience, when your safety collides with someone else's survival. Taught me that when that moment comes, you choose service over self." Her words sank into the silence like stones into deep water. She could see the recruits processing them, some with fear, some with determination. The lesson continued: ballistics, concealment, movement. Technical details filled the hours, but every so often, Maria caught their eyes drifting back to the rifle, not as a tool but as a symbol, a reminder that they weren't just learning to shoot, they were learning to bear weight. That evening, Maria returned to her quarters on base. The day's lessons had drained her, not from effort but from the ghosts she carried into every explanation. She set her own rifle on the cleaning mat, disassembling it with practiced hands. Beside her, weapon rested in its case. She never fired it anymore. She kept it as a guide, a standard, a reminder. Yet sometimes in the quiet she would open the case, touch the stock and feel presence pressing against her own. 2 engravings, two women, two legacies bound together. But tonight, the rifle seemed heavier than ever. Maria pulled journal from her drawer. She had read it countless times, but one line had always lingered. The weight of taking lives is heavy. The weight of failing to protect is unbearable. She closed her eyes, whispering the words, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the old conflict rising again. She had saved 12 men on the ridge, but she had also taken 12 lives. The recruits looked at her as if she were unbreakable, but inside she still carried the faces of those enemies, even if she never saw them clearly. Sons, brothers, fathers. What would the recruits think if they knew she sometimes woke in the middle of the night, hands trembling, hearing echoes of final journal entry? "Tell my family I chose to stand and fight." She pressed her palms against her face, exhaling. Being a sniper wasn't about invincibility. It was about living with fractures and refusing to let them shatter you. The next day, during field training, she stood behind as the recruit steadied her breathing, sighted through the scope, and fired. The shot rang out clean. The target half a mile away dropped. Turned, eyes shining, hit. Maria nodded, but her voice came firm. Don't celebrate a shot, ask yourself what it prevented. Did it save someone? Did it make the field safer? If the answer's no, then the shot means nothing. Swallowed hard, nodding. The others listened, faces tightening with the realization that they weren't learning to kill. They were learning to carry responsibility. That night, back in the classroom, Maria gathered them around her rifle. She let them look at the engravings closely for the first time. 305 confirmed kills, 317 confirmed, but numbers lie if you don't understand them. 305 aren't about death. They're about 17 families still whole. My 12 weren't about targets. They were about a patrol that lived to go home. She looked at each recruit in turn. One day this weapon will belong to someone else, maybe one of you. If it does, remember, it doesn't carry numbers, it carries lives. Silence settled like a vow. The recruit stood, shoulders squared, not in pride but in recognition. Later, alone again, Maria sat with the rifle. She touched the engravings and whispered into the empty room. "I'm doing my best, I hope it's enough." The cross at her neck pressed against her chest, steady, grounding. She held it between her fingers, closing her eyes. She wasn't ready to admit it yet, but deep down she knew. This legacy was only growing heavier. And somewhere ahead, another ridge, another choice, another moment of impossible clarity waited. Because story wasn't finished, and neither was hers. Why did the air on the transport plane feel heavier than armor? Maria Santos sat strapped into the seat of a C-17 as it rumbled through the night sky, bound once again for Afghanistan. Around her, soldiers shifted restlessly, their gear clanking in the dim red light. Some joked to cut the tension. Others sat with eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayers. Maria didn't speak. She stared at the rifle case resting at her boots, rifle, dual engravings gleaming in the faint light. She hadn't wanted to bring it. She had told herself it belonged in Fort Benning's classroom, inspiring recruits, not haunting the battlefield again. But when orders came for her redeployment, she couldn't leave it behind. Now every bump of the aircraft felt like his voice whispering from the past. You have inherited more than steel. You have inherited responsibility. Across the aisle sat stiff-backed, eyes wide with both fear and pride. She had graduated top of Maria's class only weeks earlier, and now she was deploying under Maria's command. Maria saw the same eagerness in her that she'd once seen in Jake Mitchell. Young, bright, determined, and untested. The transport hit turbulence, gripped her seat, knuckles pale. Maria leaned toward her. "Breathe," she said, "slow, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Control the fear, don't let it control you." Nodded quickly, following the rhythm. Maria watched the tension ease from her shoulders. In that moment, Maria realized she wasn't just carrying his rifle. She was carrying his role, the mentor, the guide, the protector. When the C-17 landed, the desert night swallowed them whole. Heat clung even in the darkness, the air heavy with dust. Forward operating base Sentinel greeted them with spotlights, barking orders, the constant thump of distant artillery. It was a world Maria knew too well. Briefings came quick. Intelligence reported Taliban forces regrouping in valleys near Kandahar. Supply convoys had been hit twice in the last week. American and Afghan patrols were taking fire from positions dug into ridges overlooking the roads. Maria's team was tasked with overwatch, finding the nests, eliminating the threats before convoys rolled through. It was mission all over again. The next morning, Maria lay prone on a ridge with beside her. Through her scope, she scanned the valley below, its roads twisting like scars across the desert floor. Heat shimmered. Silence pressed. Somewhere out there, unseen eyes were waiting. Whispered, "How do you know where to look?" Maria didn't answer immediately. She let the silence stretch, her own eyes studying the terrain. Then she murmured, "You don't look for people, you look for patterns, for places you would hide if you were the enemy. You learn to think like them." Her scope caught a flash of movement, the brief shimmer of glass catching sunlight from a rooftop far in the distance. Not an accident, a scope. "There," Maria whispered. She adjusted, steadying her breath. His rifle pressed against her shoulder like memory reborn. Exhale. Trigger squeeze. The figure on the rooftop collapsed before his shot ever came. "First nest down," Maria said calmly. "Watch the roads, they'll scatter now." Exhaled shakily, her first brush with death in combat. Maria glanced at her, saw the conflict in her eyes, fear clashing with relief, the realization that the shot Maria had taken had saved lives but ended one too. "You'll carry that feeling," Maria said softly. "Don't bury it, learn from it." The mission stretched into hours. They moved positions, tracked fighters through alleys and gullies, disrupted ambushes before they formed. Maria's calm precision steadied the team. Began to find her rhythm, her first shots taken with trembling hands, then steadier ones as trust in her training grew. But then came the call over comms. Convoy Bravo hit, East Road, multiple casualties, sniper fire pinning them down. Maria's blood chilled. Another ridge, another ambush, and she was too far to help unless they moved now. "Pack it up," she ordered. "We're shifting east." The climb was brutal, heat baking them as they scaled sharp rock. Maria's lungs burned, but her mind stayed locked on the echoes of his journal. "Every shot I take here means fewer threats back home." When they reached the ridge, the scene below unfolded in chaos. A convoy was trapped, vehicles smoking, soldiers pinned against the burning metal. Enemy fire raked the valley, tracers cutting through dust. "Froze, there's too many." "Look at me," Maria said sharply. His wide eyes locked onto hers. "Don't count numbers, count lives. Every one we stop gives those men below another chance to breathe. That's all that matters." Maria settled prone, his rifle steady in her hands. Through her scope she found a rooftop shooter lining up an RPG. She fired, he fell. Another replaced him, another shot, another fall. "Target's left corner building," Maria snapped. Followed her lead, breath steadying, her shot cracking. A figure crumpled, rifle slipping from his grasp. The fight dragged. Minutes stretched like hours. Enemy fighters poured through alleys, determined to finish the convoy. But every time one rose, Maria or cut them down. Then a crack split the air closer. Dirt kicked near Maria's face. A counter-sniper. "Glass North Ridge," Maria barked. She shifted, searching. Another round hissed past. The enemy had her pinned. "Stay down, Sergeant," pleaded. But Maria couldn't. If she hesitated, the convoy would be shredded. She rolled, sighted, found the faint outline of the shooter across the valley. For a heartbeat, the world shrank to two scopes staring at one another across distance and silence. Exhale. Trigger squeeze. Her shot struck first. The enemy collapsed. The silence that followed was deafening. The convoy below roared back to life, soldiers returning fire, vehicles grinding forward, pulling away from the trap. Over comms came the call, Convoy Bravo mobile, minimal casualties, threat neutralized. Lowered her rifle, her breath ragged, she turned to Maria. We saved them. Maria's eyes stayed on the valley, her voice low, reflective. No, saved them. We just carried her forward. The sun bled across the horizon as they descended the ridge, exhaustion pressing heavy. But Maria carried more than fatigue. She carried clarity. His legacy wasn't a story to be remembered. It was a standard to be lived. And Maria had just proven to herself, to memory, that the standard still held. But deep down, she knew the war wasn't finished, and neither was the test. Because every ridge demanded another choice. And someday soon, her hardest choice was still waiting. Why did this mission feel like? Weeks after saving Convoy Bravo, Maria Santos found herself back in the briefing tent, maps spread across the table, red markers bleeding across Afghanistan's ridges and valleys. Intel painted a familiar picture. High-value Taliban leaders gathering in a remote village, convoys moving weapons through choke points, chatter suggesting an ambush. Captain's voice carried steady but wary. We can't afford another disaster like last month. Overwatch positions will be established here, here, and here. Snipers will engage only on my command. Understood. Maria sat silently, cross pressing against her chest beneath her uniform. Every word echoed last mission. A ridge, faulty intel, orders to hold back until it was too late. She felt her stomach tighten, a warning coiling deep inside. When the meeting ended, fell in beside her. Sergeant, you feel it too, don't you? Something's off. Maria didn't answer right away. She looked at the younger woman, steady now, more confident after her first combat. Had grown, but she still looked to Maria for answers. Maria exhaled. Yeah, it feels wrong, just like's mission. The ridge they climbed 2 nights later overlooked the valley where the operation would unfold. Moonlight washed the landscape in silver. Through her scope, Maria studied the village below. Shadows moved, too many, too organized. The trap was already set. Her radio crackled with voice. All Overwatch hold positions. No engagement until my signal. Maria's jaw clenched. Through her scope, she saw fighters stacking weapons near the convoy route, laying IEDs in shallow ditches. Every second they waited was a second the enemy grew stronger. She remembered's journal, the final entry. Tell my family I chose to stand and fight, because that's what warriors do. Beside her whispered, what do we do? Maria's pulse thundered. Obedience meant silence. Conscience meant fire. She thought of on her ridge, holding alone against 40 fighters, disobeying orders so others could live. Maria had sworn she would honor that choice, but she had also sworn to carry lessons forward, not just repeat them. Maybe's true legacy wasn't about imitation. Maybe it was about evolution. Maria keyed her mic. Her voice was calm, resolute. Captain, this is Santos. Confirm, do you see what I see? Enemy staging weapons. IEDs on the road. If we wait, Convoy Alpha won't make it. Static, then's clipped reply. Negative, do not fire until I give the order. Maria closed her eyes briefly. She could almost hear his voice, not commanding, not demanding, but reminding. Every shot you take echoes in eternity. She opened her eyes, looked at, and made her decision. Engage, Maria whispered. The rifle thundered. One enemy dropped. Another scrambled, followed instantly, her own shot clean, sharp. The valley erupted. Fighters scattered, caught in the sudden storm. Convoy Alpha, still miles out, heard the firefight over comms and halted, avoiding the ambush entirely. Over the radio's furious voice tore through. Santos, stand down, that's a direct order. Maria ignored him. She cycled the bolt, fired again, felt rifle steady in her grip. Each shot was a choice. Each choice was a shield. Minutes blurred into chaos. The The ridge shook with retaliatory fire, dirt and stone exploding around them. Maria's cheek burned as shrapnel grazed her skin. Cried out but kept shooting, her young hand steady, her training unshakable. Together they held the ridge, not alone this time, not like, but side by side. Mentor and student, legacy and future. At last silence returned. Smoke drifted from the village, fighters scattering into the dark, their ambush broken. Convoy Alpha rerouted safely, never entering the kill zone. Maria lowered the rifle, chest heaving, collapsed beside her, eyes wide, trembling. "We disobeyed," whispered. Maria nodded. "We did." She touched the cross at her neck, feeling its weight. "But we saved them." Back at the base, the fallout came fast. Confronted her in front of the command tent, fury etched across his face. "You ignored a direct order, Santos. You risked the entire operation." Maria stood tall, rifle slung across her back. "No, sir, I saved it. Convoy Alpha is alive because we acted. If we'd waited, they'd be dead. You know it." Stared at her for a long moment. Anger wavered, tempered by reluctant respect. Finally, he exhaled. "You're walking a thin line, Sergeant. One more step and it's your career." Maria's voice stayed calm. "With respect, sir, I'd rather lose a career than watch good men die." Silence fell. No one argued. Weeks later, Maria found herself back at Fort Benning, standing before a new class of recruits. Its rifle sat in its place of honor at the front of the room, its engravings telling a story that words never fully could. She looked at the fresh faces, wide-eyed and nervous, waiting for wisdom. "This weapon," she said, "has carried two warriors, Maria Santos. Both made choices that orders. Both carried burdens they never asked for, but neither did it for themselves. They did it for the people who couldn't fight back." She paused, her gaze steady. "Being a sniper isn't about being lethal. It's about being loyal to your people, to your conscience, to the ones who trust you'll watch when they can't." She let the silence linger, then added softly, "Someday, one of you may carry this rifle. If that day comes, remember you're not carrying numbers. You're carrying lives." That evening, alone in her quarters, Maria opened journal one last time. She traced the final words. "Tell my family I chose to stand and fight, because that's what warriors do." She closed the book gently, set it beside her own journal, and added her own line. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts." She leaned back, the cross cool against her skin, its rifle resting nearby. Outside, the world moved on, new wars, new soldiers, new ridges waiting to test the next generation. But Maria knew this much. The story was no longer unfinished. It lived now in her hands, her choices, her students. And someday, when another young sniper stood where she once stood, feeling the weight of silence, the rifle would be there, waiting. Not as a weapon, as a legacy.